Okay, I think we're ready.
Good evening. Welcome to the Athens-Clarke County Planning Commission agenda setting meeting, which begins at 5:15, and we're ready to get started. Brad, I think we'll just discuss these in order. So if you want to take those and have staff move through those, I think that'll be great.
Okay, and again, with the agenda setting, we'll go through these quickly just to answer, general questions. The discussion, the back and forth, those things should really happen at planning during the meeting. But with the first item, 300 Ridge Parkway, this is the master plan for the Wood Lake mixed-use development out front that you all saw several months ago. I mean, the applicant had agreed for a couple months to defer this and hold it to try to get back to some sense of normalcy, but we're in a place now where we needed to move forward. But not a lot of changes from the original review, but probably the biggest one is they did eliminate the driveway access altogether into Wood Lake. It is still designed in a way that would allow for a fairly easy connection, provided there was a PD amendment down the road if the situation ever changed and it was determined that that driveway was wanted by the neighborhood. It could be done without a real big change, but it cannot be done without going back through the process. A couple other things in terms of restricting hours of operation. Other than that, pretty straightforward. And Bob Smith with Smith Planning Group will be representing the applicant on that item. Any questions on this one?
I had a question about the condition that staff put forward regarding the hours that trash can be picked up. And I assume that trash pickup in that part of the county is that a realistic condition? I guess that's my question.
It is not an out of the ordinary condition, but
Okay.
I think it's certainly something that we would have the authority to impose on this. Yes.
Okay.
That's actually one of the several voluntary conditions by Bob Smith.
Okay. Okay, that helps. Thank you.
And I had a question, I guess, about the construction hours, Monday to Friday. Does that mean no Saturday construction? And is that realistic?
Again, I think that was a condition imposed by the applicant that we carried in to it.
Okay. In that case, never mind. If they're good with it, I'm good with it.
I do have one question about that construction time. Brad, is 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. what is typically done? Because I wouldn't be delighted to have construction going on next to my house at 7 a.m. on weekdays, but if that's the norm when we restrict hours, so be it.
I think that is probably fairly consistent with others, but I think it's a legitimate question to ask the applicant tonight during the meeting.
And it can go much later, I know
My experience is they want to get started before it gets hot. They may quit earlier than that, but they want to get rolling while it's cool.
I just wanted to add the comment that I believe our noise ordinance as it pertains to landscaping begins at 7 a.m. Is that right?
Yes. Okay.
A similar timing question too, since we're talking about that. I noticed in one place it talked about how the development, I think it was in the applicant's report, said the restaurants would not seat customers after 11 p.m. and then in the recommended restriction it would be cease operations at 11. So I wasn't sure if there's a distinction between the two, if those are two different. I mean, it's one thing to seat people at 11, but then your kitchen still, I mean, does that mean your kitchen closes at 11 and people can hang out till midnight? I wasn't sure how that was defined, but we can talk about that in the meeting too.
Yeah, and I mean, our take on it generally was that, I mean, to try to regulate or enforce at that hour of the night when they're seating people would be extremely difficult. I mean, we're basically saying that, your hours of operation go to 11 o'clock. So you need to be closing at that point. And I know restaurants always, you're gonna have late eaters that are getting out, but yeah, we can talk about that one more too. Okay, next item, also a return master plan development. This is the Whitehall Road, Pine Lodge Road master plan. Josh Coons will be presenting, Coons Environmental. I believe we will have 2 representatives from the neighborhood that we offered them to join the meeting via WebEx for their 10-minute time slot. I think they've both opted to appear in the auditorium to speak to you, but it's our understanding they will be here for that one. A lot of changes with that. We do have one condition that's going to be put on the screen that we wanted to change some wording on one of the conditions that's in there. It did not make it into the report, but I believe the condition right now says that the parking lot needs to be revised based on the restaurant or commercial use. That really needs to be in reverse. I mean, they're showing a 12-space parking lot. It's a binding plan. So the way that condition should read is that the retail or restaurant uses shall be limited based on the parking that's provided in the ordinance. So, I mean, to say it the way we've got it worded now would impose that by right, if they had a large seating capacity restaurant, they could add 70 more parking spaces somewhere without having to come back and amend the plan, and that's not the intent. So and we'll show you that on the screen when Rick will be doing all the presentations this evening, and he'll show you that revised wording.
Yeah, and I've spoken to Josh about that. He's amenable to the change.
Okay. Other than that, there's some signal timing issues that need to be looked at both the Barnett Shoals Road traffic signal at Whitehall and then College Station, Barnett Shoals, and I think Josh may address that tonight as well. But other than that, we're recommending approval with a few conditions. Okay. Next item, 880 Belmont Road is a Verizon tower. We did go ahead and have the third-party independent consultant do their report and assessment of the request, and they are in agreement with the Verizon engineers that there is a need in this area for an additional tower, and you've received all of that information. I would remind you, as with all communication towers like this, we do have an adjacent property owner that's contacted us, and it appears that her primary concern is not necessarily with the location of her house, but she has a horse barn that is close to her property line. So it's I think it's within 400 or 500 feet of the tower. And if it gets to the point where the discussion turns towards concerns for the safety or the health of the horses in the barn based on emissions, that's not something we can discuss. That's all protected under federal law. The federal government has determined what is safe and what is not. And so that's kind of a real big no-no in telecommunication zoning hearings is, we cannot make any decision based on environmental issues or health and safety issues from that standpoint. So if it goes that way, I'll stop you, but just want to go ahead and let you know that up front. Other than that, pretty straightforward request. This tower is really kind of sitting back in the middle of a large wooded lot, not very tall. We feel like it's an appropriate special use, and we're recommending approval.
Brad, who will be presenting that? Is it David Kirk?
David Kirk, yes. David Kirk with Troutman Sanders on behalf of Verizon. Okay. Next item, it's a type 1 rezone, straight rezone for with a land use amendment from employment to mixed density residential, and then from commercial office to multifamily RM1. Ed Lane with Smith Planning Group will be presenting this one. It's a piece of property. It's got some old zoning history on it. I believe at one point it was a kennel or something, or there were some kennels on the property. It went through an old zoning probably back in the 80s. I mean, our recommendation on this one is not to approve it. you know, there's multifamily backing up to it that is larger parcels that really have frontage along Barnett Shoals. This particular property is in an area that it's got offices around it. There's some offices across the street. It just, with all the other multifamily we've got and the locations, this just did not seem to be an appropriate straight zoning change at this point on a piece of property that's pretty steep. We did not feel like it was the most appropriate zoning change. So our recommendation on that one is do not approve.
Brad, can I ask a question about that? I wondered in reading that staff recommendation, the recommendation makes reference to the adjacent parcels, which are government and office. But when you go one parcel over, then you've got a big condo complex, and then across the street, there's a big apartment complex. So there does seem to be a good bit of multifamily along there. And I just wondered, it doesn't seem out of place on Research Drive to me to have something like that at first blush. But I wondered if you could expand a little bit on that.
I think our take on it was that, I think you're right in that it's not as if we're trying to drop a multifamily piece right in the middle of a large single family zoned area. But with the existing zoning being commercial office, offices directly across, you do have some condos kind of catty corner on the opposite side of Research that were put in probably 14 or 15 years ago, but just didn't really see the justification as to why this property couldn't be developed as zoned with commercial office zoning on it, instead of going to just a straight multifamily with all the other multifamily. And that's our recommendation to you, but certainly you have the option of making your own decision on this one, no doubt.
And when you say developed as commercial office, I gathered from the application that could incorporate a lot of residential, like on the second or third floor. Is that understanding correct?
You can do up to 16 beds an acre on the property on the second and third floor over the top of office space on the ground. Yes.
Okay, and that's as zoned without any need for our permission. Is that of right that they could do that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We did want to, we are recommending approval of the future land use change. It's more of a correction in that area. Right now it's an employment future land use, and that just really doesn't make sense in there with commercial office and residential in the area. So we are recommending approval of the future land use change.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
That's 2 votes.
Pardon me?
So that, wait a minute.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Okay. And then the last 2 are both first reviews, preliminary plan developments. The first item is a request from W&A Engineering. Scott Haynes will be presenting that item. Mr. Haynes does have, I believe, 2 additional individuals that are either the owners or the ones that are looking at the property under contract that have joined him. And I have explained for this, we did not do this last month from a standpoint of we only allowed 1 person per item to join the WebEx meeting unless there was an opposition and they could join too. We've got a couple that have asked to have somebody else join them, and we've made it clear that they can do that. But when it's time, in this case, for example, for Mr. Haynes with Williams to have his 10-minute time period, if he wants to allow the other 2 to speak, they've got to share that 10 minutes. He does not get 10 and then the other 2 get their 3 via WebEx, because that's not fair. We don't allow anybody else to join the meeting and speak that way. So they understand that, and I've explained that to them again. But in the case of sharing the 10 minutes, I'll keep up with the time, and I will give a 1-minute warning for anybody speaking on WebEx, and then let the chair know when the 10 minutes are up. You'll all hear me say it, but that's the best way we can do it on this one. with people speaking in the auditorium, we still have the timer, and Robin is working the auditorium this evening, and he'll stop them when the time's appropriate. This one, preliminary PD for some townhomes. This is along the Jennings Mill Parkway on the opposite side of the road from where the Legacy Mill apartments were built back in the early 2000s. That road was initially designed as a 4-lane divided median parkway, of which only 2 of the outside lanes were put in as a 2-way street. So you've got a really, really wide right of way that you can see from the plan that is causing those units to be set well back off the road. But that's a product of longer term planning for road development. But it is for comments only at this point. I think you did get a letter from the adjacent neighborhood sent to you today. And so they are looking for your comments and your input on that one tonight as a preliminary first review. Okay. And then the last item, 498 Little Oak Street, again, preliminary PD from RS25 Airport to RS5 Airport PD. No, RS5 Airport to RS5 Airport PD. This is one of those planned developments like the Dublin Street one that you all looked at for the Cottage Court community. It's a product of being in the airport approach zone, which limits minimum lot size for new lots to no less than an acre in size. And really the only option if you want to subdivide property smaller than that is to go through the PD process. So we have done our preliminary review. It's a piece of property that's about 1/3 of an acre now, and they're wanting to subdivide it into 2 lots instead of 1 for 2 homes. Again, they're looking for comments. We've provided our comments, and we hit them kind of hard on this one. You know, to me, there's great opportunity in people asking for planned developments to receive, but at the same time, you're providing assurance to the community in the form of, you know, development standards and design standards. And what we're really kind of pushing for here from a staff first review of this is that, you know, this appears to just be a PD for the sole purpose of taking a small piece of property already and cutting it into 2 houses instead of 1. They refer to it throughout as 2 family homes. Just to cut the chase with this, we're not seeing a whole lot that wouldn't be required by right anyway to be built. There's not a lot about either one of these 2, at least in their first submittal, that really says single family home any differently. There's large parking pads. And so we're asking for them to, you know, what else can you provide in turn for getting another lot here as part of a PD? And again, first review, the applicant will represent himself on this one. His name is Jeffrey Halls. And he will, if he's not on the line now, he will be joining us, and certainly anxious to get your comments on this one as well. Good piece of property. It's right adjacent to the Firefly Trail. But we're just looking for a little more on this one.
Does this property back up to that, that I think it was a planned development that we got a while back on Dublin Street that had like, it was like the cottage court that backs up to that, right?
It is right there at it. I'm looking on the map to see if it physically touches it or not. No, it looks like there's 1 lot in between it on Dublin Street before you get to the property that we did the cottage court.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Brad, I have just an informational question. I don't have an understanding of the airport overlay, the rationale for not allowing subdivision generally in the airport overlay. And it was relevant last month, and it's relevant again now. And so I've realized it's something I should understand. Can you, or can someone help me?
Sure, I can. You know, to the extent that I can. I mean, basically what those overlays are doing, there are certain uses that they are trying to restrict through a minimum special use process. And they're generally ones that tend to make more sense to you. Like, probably don't want to put a movie theater, you know, at the end of an approach for a runway where you're concentrating people in a very small space at higher densities. So movie theaters, restaurants, traditional multifamily apartments, higher density uses are generally all of those that are not permitted by right in those approaches to the runways. With regard to single family, probably 5 or 6 years ago, it may have been a little longer, the ordinance was different in that it allowed for the subdivision of properties, but then if you were going to build a single family house on a lot that was smaller than a certain size, you had to get a special use permit. And it just, I mean, it puts you guys in a horrible spot constantly because the lots were already created. And now the person's coming forward asking for special use permits to build houses. And what are you really going to tell them no at that point? So the ordinance was changed and basically just across the board in an attempt to limit densities in those approaches. And it was set at a minimum lot size of an acre.
But there are some other things with airport overlay that have to do with height of buildings and lighting. Some other things also.
That's right.
Wouldn't apply to this, but
those are all things that are under the ordinance required, even if you have a by right use. I mean, he absolutely has a right to go in and build one house on this lot. And when he were to do that, because it's in the approach, it's still, we're going to have to look at roof materials and lighting and those types of things to ensure what's perceived as safety for the airport. It's when you further subdivide is when we've got to begin looking at it. And, you know, and again, it's 2 lots instead of 1, but it's any new lots under an acre have to go through this process to be approved. I think it's a density, trying to protect density.
Brad, I'm not sure if I understood. So if somebody if he came to us and wanted to build, or let me ask that again, for him to, if he wanted to build one house on that lot, would he come to the planning commission or not? No, that's what changed 6 years ago-ish.
You just get a permit to build his house.
And it's during that permit process where administratively there'd be conversations around roof materials and lighting and things like that. Okay, got it.
This is all about getting the second lot.
Got it.
Yep.
on a lot that is a third of an acre.
Correct. Okay.
Can we take up a collection and buy Rick a new microphone?
With that.
That's a new webcam. It should be working. So
The camera works great. The microphone, it sounds like he's in an echo chamber.
It does.
Yes, it's his office, but I don't know if there's a way to improve that, but he is kind of hard to hear for me. You know, I got this cool space age headset that works great, but I look like kind of goofy, but I can hear you all maybe for the first time in my life. So
I'll just keep reminding Rick to talk loud and we'll see if we can't get him a cool headset or something for the next
there
one.
you go. There you go.
Am I too loud or too soft?
Too soft.
Okay, I can speak loud.
Okay. All right. As a reminder, and I'm about to let public information know that we are completed with this meeting right on time. Don't log out. Just take a 15-minute break. We will rejoin at 6 o'clock right back here. And that one will be the same as it was last month for public information. Will count us in and then we will go live. So
I think it would be helpful if everybody muted in case there's conversation at their house. Then the other thing is, I'm still unclear about when to start. Is it when the sign comes up that says Athens-Clarke County Planning Commission? That means it's ready, we're ready to begin?
for the regular meeting, you will hear Todd come over the system and say, we're ready to go live in 3, 2, 1, and then we'll go live.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Well, Todd, we are done. I'm going to hit the stop streaming and hand it over to you.